All right, welcome to the third webinar in our series on instructional coaching. In this webinar, we're going to be talking about the benefits of virtual instructional coaching. You'll notice that I have my auto-generated closed captioning on today. So again, my apologies for any errors typographically in the transcription. Hopefully they aren't so severe that they inhibit your ability to track and understand the information that we're sharing today. Our goal is to provide you just an overview of the benefits of instructional coaching, and so we'll dive right in. Again, for those of you who are, this is your first webinar with us, I'm Ildi Lasko-Kerr. I'm the CEO of Ribbit Learning. As we get started, if you can in the chat, just type the city and state that you live in, as well as any question that you might have about virtual coaching. So feel free to drop your city and state and a question that you have about virtual coaching in the chat. All right, let's get on to the webinar. So here is our team. So you obviously have me on today. Robert DeBacco is our Chief Operating Officer, and Adrian Teo is our Chief Technology Officer. And we are supported by a team of advisors who are all embedded in the education sector, either in schools or districts or other organizations that support teachers and leaders to make sure that the work that we're doing is really meeting the needs of real-life teachers and administrators across the country. Today's webinar is going to focus on giving you an opportunity to reflect on the impact of virtual instructional coaching and how that may influence either a new or existing coaching program in your school or district. And by way of recap, just to make sure that we're prepared to talk about the aspects of virtual coaching, in our first webinar, we talked about the importance of instructional coaching to begin with. And so this is from that first session. If you weren't able to join us for the first webinar, those resources and materials are also available online. So you're invited to go back and access the research and the articles as well as that recording. But you can see from this research that instructional coaching is, when we say dollar for dollar, the most impactful in terms of changing educator knowledge and behavior. That really comes from this seminal work by Joyce and Showers, that without a coach, whether that's a peer-to-peer instructional coach or somebody to walk alongside educators, very little, if any, of the knowledge that they gain in a traditional workshop or training, even an observation of an instructional video or some other tool that they might find on the internet, leads to changes in classroom application. And so it is critical that because coaches are the intervention for changing teacher behavior, that we expand access to them. And so hence why we're going to talk about how virtual coaching can help you do that. These are just some of the benefits, high level, from the research that we presented, and really that underscores all of the work that we do here at Ribbit. But evidence from a meta-analysis of over 60 studies shows that instructional coaching has significant instructional impacts on both teacher practice as well as student achievement. Those are strong and positive changes in instructional practice and outcomes on standardized assessments. But they also show that it improves teachers' working conditions, school cultures, decreases burnout, and increases retention, which is why we really focus on this idea of getting more teachers access to a coach to support them so that schools and districts can decrease teacher turnover. And then lastly, a study that was interesting and impactful is that instructional coaching actually has the ability to decrease discipline rates, in particular for Black students. So lots of positive benefits for teachers and their students when we have instructional coaching supporting educators. We also spoke last time in our second webinar around the coaching image problem that we have. And what I would say is essentially, if you do not have a high demand for coaching in your district, you probably have a negative stigma associated with instructional coaching. And that stems very likely from either financial constraints or limitations that then ultimately help to create additional structural and operational challenges. So as you think and reflect on coaching in your school or district, and whether or not you have teachers demanding instructional coaching as a support system, if the answer to that question is no, you likely have constraints that are most likely initiated by financial limitations and then human capital constraints. Here are some of the other obstacles that limit access. And again, this is all from the research in Craft Blazer that we presented earlier. But the result of those financial constraints means that there aren't enough coaches or coaching roles in most schools and districts. Coaching is often seen as evaluative because it's taken on as a secondary role for an administrator, or coaches take on quasi-administrative roles. Things that are discussed and covered in coaching seem to feel more like compliance rather than aligned to the individual needs of teachers. And so we see these obstacles really both limiting access to coaching, but also then ultimately the impact. So we're trying to undo or remedy these obstacles by looking to other solutions, and in this case, what virtual coaching can do to ameliorate some of these obstacles. So the good news from the research is that scaling coaching is absolutely possible. The researchers have identified the use of instructional coaching as one model to scale coaching, given all of those existing constraints that we talked about just a second ago. And what I should say is, under the conditions of this meta-analysis, they studied not only traditional site-based instructional coaching models, but also virtual coaching models that we'll talk about here briefly. So because this research was in 2018, certainly it may not necessarily reflect all of the different ways that we use technology to deliver coaching. It certainly doesn't address the use of artificial intelligence and other technologies. So we'll talk about a very specific type of transition from site-based coaching to virtual coaching here in a minute. But the important thing to note is that from this research, there is evidence that virtual coaching is as equally effective as on-site coaching models. And so as we think about using virtual coaching to increase access and impact, LEAs, schools and district leaders should feel, a sense of relief, if you will, that shifting to more virtual implementation, or at least increasing access through virtual coaching, will lead to comparable outcomes for educators and therefore their students. So that is a really positive thing that we've seen from this research. So what is virtual coaching then? So the research evidence around effects of instructional coaching is focused on a particular type of coaching model. And that is a process where an expert coaches educators in an individualized, intensive, and sustained way. That support is sustained over time, and it's focused on that context of that teacher's classroom, and that coaching conversation and the relationship is focused on practicing specific skills. So that is the type of coaching that leads to those strong positive student achievement outcomes and teacher outcomes. So a virtual coach then is simply using technology to work remotely to deliver those same types of coaching activities. So again, the first underlying premise is, do we have high quality coaching in a coaching program that meets these research and evidence-based criteria? And then second to that, can we use video conferencing tools to facilitate remote coaching? And the answer to both of those questions is obviously yes. So let's look at some of the benefits of virtual instructional coaching. And again, these are all research-based evidence from those 60 articles, so from the meta-analysis. So we think about the increased capacity. So using virtual coaches gives a school or district the opportunity to coach more teachers. So we increase capacity around the coaches themselves to be able to work with more educators. It gives you potentially the access of increasing the capacity of the number of coaches that you could be supporting and having on your staff or working with teachers. So capacity increases for more coaching. Second to that, and kind of corollary, is increases access. So as you have the capacity for more coaching, that means you can give more teachers or educators access to a coach. So no longer do you have to limit coaching to new or struggling teachers or to tested subject areas or grades, which we know contribute to the negative stigma around instructional coaching. But we can now potentially provide a coach to each educator and access to that important benefit of an instructional coach. Benefits of instructional coaching also lead to some of those structural and operational benefits. So it has the ability to lower or entirely eliminate costs. And so you can think of those as clearly if you have a coach traveling between schools, for example, you eliminate the cost of travel time, travel reimbursements, and some of those hard costs, but it also lowers some of the other costs that might be associated with coaching based on how you deliver the model itself. There's lots of efficiencies that can be increased as you do virtual coaching, right? The need to use technology and pop in and out of meetings versus wasting time, if you will, going between buildings is an inefficient way of using time of a coach. But it also focuses the role of the coach on those particular evidence-based or research-based activities. So in the world of virtual coaching, where that coach is not a site-based staff member, they are no longer pulled into covering duties and other things that might come up that legitimately need to be filled, but not necessarily by the role of a coach. And so now we see coaches really spending 100% of their time coaching in the virtual coaching model, versus in some cases that could be as low as 20% of the time. The use of a virtual coach that isn't a site-based coach also gives the possibility of increasing a trusting relationship and creating a more psychologically safe environment, right? The person who's coaching me is not in my building, and so they don't see all of the things that may be going on. You know, they didn't see me lose my cool in a staff meeting, for example, or be embarrassed by having a conversation with somebody else. So I really can build this trusting, psychologically safe environment in a virtual coaching platform or model that is not necessarily harder to build in a brick and mortar setting, but just maybe takes longer to accomplish. A few other benefits that come directly from virtual coaching. And in this case, this slide has a few that are from that research, as indicated by the asterisks, but also what we found here at Ribbit when we've deployed our virtual instructional coaches as some additional benefits that we wanted to share with you. So in kind of keeping with this idea of increasing capacity and access, the use of a virtual instructional coach or a support program like ours gives you the opportunity to improve inclusivity, diversity, and representation. So we know in particular for teachers of color that they may or may not have access to a coach of color in our traditional schools and districts because of, again, human capital constraints. But leveraging technologies like Ribbit and others, where you have access to virtual coaches who are not on your staff, gives you the opportunity to provide a representative set of supports to your educators. It also, again, gives you the opportunity to create a more inclusive coaching program. So now you're able to coach teachers who are in non-tested subjects, in curriculum areas like fine arts, PE, in high school, CTE teachers, for example, right? So you are creating a more inclusive coaching program, you're diversifying who gets coaching, and then the coaches themselves can be far more diverse and representative of either your community or the teachers that you serve. All of that, we believe, really increases equity, right? It equitably distributes coaches to those teachers who need them based on what they need versus a model that is focused on the needs or the priorities or focus areas of the school or district. Of course, those things are still important, but now we give the opportunity to create an equitable coaching system that's really driven on and centered on the educator as the learner. All those things coupled together really help to increase educator agency, right? So they themselves are making more decisions, and now we're treating them more like professionals. The idea of focusing on confidentiality and a non-evaluative coaching relationship is really critical to the impact of coaching in classrooms. And so, as I mentioned, having a virtual coach who is not a site-based educator, again, who I can now ensure that the conversation that an educator has with their coach is confidential, and that there's no evaluation or evaluative nature, or that information is not going back to the evaluator, really increases, again, that feeling of psychological safety, but the willingness to really risk take and try new things in their classroom. Again, from the research, we can see that virtual coaching increases impact, and increases the amount of teachers we can impact, and then ultimately can improve the retention rates of all of our teachers. But now we're actually bringing in teachers who would have never otherwise gotten coaching and using that as a lever for retention. Lastly, and it's not on the slide, but certainly by expanding access to instructional coaching and that level of support, that also turns into a recruitment strategy, right? So the ability to recruit teachers by sharing your coaching program that includes the use of virtual instructional coaching is not only a retention strategy, but it can certainly be a recruitment and pipeline solution strategy as well. So I've painted a pretty rosy picture of virtual instructional coaching, and I do not want to make it sound like it is easy to implement on its own without some considerations. So I want to talk briefly about a few things to consider when trying to scale coaching. And this comes from the research literature as well. So the first and really the primary challenge for most schools and districts is that of human capital. So building a core, or we call our coaches a cadre of capable coaches whose expertise and experience is matched to the diverse needs of educators in a school or district is incredibly challenging. So on your own as a school or district, it's very unlikely that you'll be able to build a cadre or a core of teachers into coaches that could really support all of the needs of every educator. And again, those challenges are undergirded by primarily financial, but then those turn into structural and operational challenges. Our solution, and certainly you could try to implement some of this, but our solution to address this challenge is engaging current and former educators. So our model really is designed to keep current educators in the classroom so they stay grounded in the work of education, but utilize those who have the passion and the expertise to coach others as essentially freelance coaches. We certainly have former educators who, for a variety of reasons, have left the profession, but still have a passion for supporting other educators on our cadre. But by leveraging current and former educators, we really can build a robust group of coaches with varying expertise, right? So we have coaches who are CTE teachers. We have coaches who are special ed teachers, and kind of every content and specialization in between. Training coaches is a critical part of creating a capable cadre. And so having a coaching program that's grounded in the research on effective instructional coaching, but also the practice and program standards that we talked about in our second webinar from the New Teacher Center is really essential. But it's not just that one-time coaching training that's critical, but this ongoing support to help monitor the quality and maintain those standards. And so again, a challenge inside of a school or district is often who is going to be the coach of the coaches, and how do we continue to provide professional development and support and feedback to that cadre that we build. So things to think about as you're scaling and trying to address the challenge of your human capital staff in your building. The second big challenge, and one that is honestly not easily solved until we start to address the negative stigma around instructional coaching, is that of educator buy-in and investment. So it's clear from the research and our own practice that without that buy-in and investment into the coaching process that I described, coaching is really unlikely to impact instructional practice. And we see that in coaching, teachers who opt out of coaching, coaches or teachers, especially veteran teachers who don't want to coach anywhere near their classroom. And so if that's true in your school or district and you have an investment or buy-in issue, the real solution is going back to figuring out what is contributing to the stigma of coaching in your school or district, and then trying to address those particular characteristics. Our solution is certainly that as well. Our goal of being able to offer every educator or each educator a coach, no matter what or where they teach, is an attempt to decrease the stigma of coaching so that it isn't just for teachers who need new or struggling teachers, or it's not just for those tested subject areas, for example. By increasing access to coaching, we can begin to start to change the perception of coaching again. Creating and collaborating with schools and districts to create customized coaching programs to meet educators' needs. So again, that might be something that you have the capacity to do within your school or district, but really customizing coaching based on what educators need. Ensuring, no matter what you do, that coaching is non-evaluative. So pulling the role of coaching and trying to separate that from those who evaluate educators is essential and critical. Certainly in our model, that's foundational to the way that we coach, and ensuring that that the work that they do with the educators is never seen as evaluative in nature. And then working incredibly hard to create psychologically safe coaching relationships. For us, that means training coaches on how to create psychologically safe environments and providing them the resources and tools to be successful in that, but then also implementing that in every conversation that our coaches have with their coachees. So again, some of these solutions that we use are things that you could certainly and absolutely implement in your school or district to make it so that you're able to scale coaching to more educators and ultimately increase the demand for coaching. So why does it matter? Well, clearly there's an educator crisis around teacher retention and teacher shortages that is not new to education, but has created a whole new host of challenges as we see the aging of educators, the retirements that are coming, and then just the working conditions that are driving educators out of the workforce. So again, research really reaffirms and supports the need for professional learning systems. So those of us who create those systems in our school or district to expand access to this important support to teachers. So instructional coaching, really, we have to figure out ways to create that opportunity for each educator, because for every educator a school or district loses, they roughly lose between $25,000 to $30,000 per teacher. So not only are you wasting those onboarding dollars, but all of the investment in that educator. So that's a huge waste of financial resources, But what that also translates to educators is increasing their levels of frustration, contributing to their burnout, and then ultimately contributing to turnover. So when we say that scaling coaching is a retention strategy, it's really grounded in the research that we've seen around how systems that have provided more instructional coaching have been able to save money, decrease teacher or educator frustration, decrease educator burnout, and ultimately improve retention rates. So as we're getting close to the end of the webinar, I want to give you an opportunity to pause and think about the information that I've shared today, to close and reflect on this learning. So you have 3 prompts on the screen that I would like to invite you to consider one of the 3, or just let your mind answer a different question that you might have coming into today. So I'll stop chatting for a second to give you a minute to think about any one of these 3 prompts. What obstacles exist that might limit your ability to expand it, and how might virtual coaching help mitigate that? What benefits are most important in your individual school or district as you might develop a new coaching program if you don't have one? And then third, what can virtual coaching do to enhance an existing coaching program or solve a challenge that you might have in your school or district? So think on either of those 3 questions for a second. All right, so let's go back to our learning objective that we set out for ourselves today. Our goal was to reflect on the impact of virtual instructional coaching that it has on either your new or an existing coaching program. So hopefully you've gotten a lot of data and evidence to support that thinking. You can see what some of those benefits are, and those 3 closure and reflection questions gave you a chance to start to begin to do that work. Obviously, there's lots more thinking that you could do after today. Rivet's on a mission to help you support your educators. So you can tell that we are passionate about expanding access to instructional coaching to each and every educator in every school across the country. We believe that that is a support to new veteran teachers, instructional coaches, and administrators. So every educator means every educator. We know that that work can help you support improving your working conditions and ultimately retain the teachers that you have, that you've invested your time, energy, and resources into, all for the goal, along with you, to improve the quality of teaching and student outcomes. If there is anything that we can do to help support your efforts in this area, please feel free to connect with us and reach out. My contact information is available on the screen. And then lastly, we have one more webinar in this series where we're going to tackle the challenges of AI and how it influences the role of an instructional coach, and what that might look like. Our 2 prior webinars you can see were on the effects of instructional coaching on teachers and students, and I've mentioned the content from that already, as well as how we can begin to shift educator perception. You can still access all of those recordings and the materials for those webinars. And then you'll also receive the information to access the materials from today, so that you can feel free to share them with your colleagues. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them. So we'll kind of pause for a quick second and allow you to either drop a question into the chat, or if you feel comfortable, you're invited to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask any questions that you might have. All right. Well, it looks like we don't have any questions, and so we've been super efficient with our time. That means that we all get a little bit of our time back in our calendar and our schedule. So if there's any other information that you need from us, again, please feel free to reach out and let us know. Otherwise, it was a pleasure chatting with you today and sharing this information. Again, please feel free to share it with others that you know are trying to do this work alongside of us. Have a great rest of your afternoon. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and we are excited to see you in the next webinar. If there's any resources or support that you need, by all means, please feel free to reach out to us. Thanks and have a great day.